This is CXO Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the minds of business and technology leaders and reveals the strategies behind their success. Coming up in today's show.
Honestly, and I think if technologists sit back and listen to it, they'll go, well, that's right. You know, it doesn't matter if I'm in healthcare or if I'm in finance or if I'm a startup or if I'm in food, you know, networks are networks, software is software. You know, there is the application of that technology that is the nuance between the industry, but by and large, it's still the same thing. We all have different problems to solve, but we're going to use one of those tools in our tool bag to help us solve that problem.
CXO Secrets is powered by EDS, going beyond connections. Find out about upcoming C-level events, experiences, and insights at edsxevents.com. Tim Newton, Chief Technology Officer and Head of Brand Operations at Long John Silver's. Thank you for joining us on CXO Secrets.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
I'm happy you're here as well. And where is here for you? Where are you joining us from today? And here we are, more or less the beginning of the week. What's your work week looking like so far?
Yeah, so I'm here in Louisville, Kentucky in the United States. It's 7:37, which is a little early for the office around here, but I generally get in around this time. But the work we've got our franchise advisory board coming in this week. So a lot of meetings with those folks, a lot of meetings with our field operations teams. We do this about once a quarter. So that's what's got me busy this week.
I want to talk about that franchise piece in a moment and about the broader context of what that means for you at Long John Silver. And today, let's explore what it takes for you to modernize a brand like Long John Silver's that, as I'm aware, and I'm not even based in the US, it's been part of American life for, 50 years or more. The technology, the operations, the workforce as well, and you've already mentioned the franchise model there, which I'm sure adds some additional complexity to all of that. And of course, as we do with all of our guests here, I'll ask you about some of your CXO leadership secrets as well. Does that all sound okay?
Sounds perfect.
All right. Well, then let's crack on. Tim, Long John Silver's, tell me about that. Perhaps for our audience outside of the US, tell us what it is, and then about your role or roles there.
Yeah, so Long John Silver's it's a 56-year-old concept. It's primarily seafood, fried seafood. We also offer chicken and kind of all the accompaniments there, but it is a quick service restaurant, which means it's got a drive-through window that you come up, or you can come in. We obviously offer digital channels for folks, our website, our mobile app, and kiosk. So it's been around a really long time. Most of the folks that I've spoken with, you know, I'm a Louisville native. You know, the brand was actually developed about an hour from here in Lexington, Kentucky, but it's called Louisville home for the better part of 30 years. And so growing up, a lot of folks my age were taken to Long John Silver's by their grandparents on like the weekend to enjoy a Sunday dinner. So when I tell folks within the industry or I'm either conferences or whatever and say, hey, I work for Long John Silver's, everybody always seems to, I remember that brand from my parents and my grandparents kind of thing. So it's very nostalgic.
Yeah. It's good to have that brand recognition. It's priceless to have that brand recognition. And like you say, a brand that's been around since 1970 or thereabouts, that's great. But times change, tastes change as well. And, you know, brands need to modernize. And I think it's really interesting what you say there. It's a brand with good recognition, but there's nostalgia, and it's the place where your grandparents took you. That works on one level, but does it work for a business that's seeking to thrive and grow in the 2020s and beyond, I guess is my next question to you. And well, I know the answer to this because this is part of your remit there right now, isn't it?
Yeah, so the brand at one point in time, it blew up to about 1,500 locations. So it was much more prolific throughout the United States than it is today. Unfortunately, it's gotten compressed back down. We operate around 500 locations now, but we are up and growing. So It had a necessary compression, economic times, what have you. The case may be poor leadership perhaps in the past, but a new owner bought it back in 2022.
Okay.
And when he was very passionate, longtime franchisee, had about, I think, 60 restaurants at the time. He's got closer to 70 now. But he bought the brand because he believed in the brand, brought in a brand new CEO. That CEO has assembled a team of sort of seasoned restaurant vets. I'm one of those included, but really across the enterprise. So injected new blood, a little bit of new way of thinking, and just this idea that, you know what, we had this nostalgic brand, we've got this following, we've got this brand recognition. How do we bring some of our perhaps dilapidated assets? Some of our restaurants don't look as good as they once did. How do we modernize that?
Mm.
His strategy was to start with injecting some capital, rebuilding some of these locations. So we've got some new looking concepts out there. And we've seen just a tremendous, um, I'm not really sure pent up. I guess there was a pent up demand out there. And so as we've brought back some restaurants to old locations, we've seen just this influx and this huge swelling. Interestingly enough, recently, obviously the U.S. was one of the countries that hosted the World Cup, and there was this thing going around social media where an individual asked, what's been your favorite thing about the U.S. or what do you like most? And there were two ladies from Sweden that said, "We love Long John Silver's." And oh my gosh, it seems like the social media world absolutely has gone bonkers since then. Lots of folks trying the food, lots of folks sharing videos of them literally sitting in their cars eating the food. And I mean, sales have followed. It's been tremendous for us, but it's where that matching of that sort of
Yeah.
that nostalgic brand name. And if you provide, I think, a great product, new folks get to try it. When new folks get to try it, it just continues that on.
So new ownership then 2022, like you say, a renewed energy, renewed investment to modernize the brand. And like you say, recognize that pent up demand for it, which the FIFA World Cup during the summer of 2026 kind of surfaced a little bit there, which must be very exciting for everyone involved. What about your role there? You've spoken about the contraction, compression of the real estate, hopefully to a firmer platform that will enable sustainable growth in the future for you guys. But from a technology point of view then, as CTO, what has that bit meant for you?
Yeah, so at the time that I came on board, they were sort of in the middle of a new point of sales rollout. And so my initial charge was sort of get that across the finish line. But in addition to that, it was to take a look at the rest of the technology across the stack. And so you're talking your back office, they were wanting to do kiosk. We had just wrote a mobile app. So really my focus was to look across the entirety of the enterprise, whether that be, architecturally, how things were put together, whether it be the specifics of the system, but then obviously focusing on the friction for the restaurant operators and for our
Yeah.
guests, and figure out how do we modernize the brand? How do we modernize the technology? Because today's technology is much more frictionless than some existing technologies out there. So how do we bring those into the organization, but not lose that nostalgic feel? That's literally been my charge for the last 2 years.
Mm. Because there's an argument, isn't there? And look, I don't work in brand, but there's an argument to be made that the technology is the brand. If your customers are increasingly engaging with the brand through whether it's social media, which is maybe slightly different, but on a kiosk through a smartphone app, that is your customer's touch point with your brand. And if the technology fails, then the brand fails as well. So that really brings that kind of technology back office all the way right to the front of the shop, doesn't it? Right the way to the front office.
Yeah, I think, there's a saying that you've got to meet your customers where they are.
Yeah.
And, obviously you can't take a brick and mortar location and just drop one anywhere. But I think that digital presence is what's allowed you to do that. And whether that be your own first party channels or through third party channels, we've seen an increase since I joined. The brand was roughly about 3% of digital orders came through our first party channels, and roughly around 8 to 9% came through third party. So think of your DoorDashes, your Uber
Yeah.
Eats, that sort of stuff. But, our focus has been to try to push more consumers to the first party channel. So, we've seen 100% growth. We're now up to 6% in digital sales. We've seen our third party channels also increase. They're up to around 11%, which isn't necessarily huge. It's in line with some of our competitors, but I spent 9 years at Papa John's, and when I left, we were roughly 65% of all sales came through our digital channel. So I'm very familiar with that digital space. Trying to take a brick and mortar that already offers a convenient drive-through and taking them digital is a very interesting experience. It's one of the things where I think, we're trying to meet our customers where they are. We're trying to get that younger demographic, but it's super easy just to obviously drive up to the drive-through. So what we're doing there is we're trying to modernize that drive-through. We used to have static menu boards, and you can imagine whenever a new offer would come out, a new marketing window, we'd have to send all these printed menu boards, and the team members would have to stand those up. We don't have to do that day for the large portion of our restaurants because we've enhanced the drive-through experience with digital menu boards, which not only allows us to make changes in real time very, very quickly, it also introduces the opportunity to day part the menus or to even look at loyalty opportunities for our guests in the drive-through. So we think that that's enhancing the personalization
Oh, yeah.
experience. It's also able to showcase some additional products for us. And all of that, it just kind of goes into the vision of how do we get from, this nostalgic brand that, kind of your grandparents, we don't want to run on your grandparents' technology anymore. How do we bring it to the new age and make it modern, make it fun, make it a great experience for our guests?
Yeah. I mentioned a moment ago that I'm not a brand person, but your job title has you as a brand person as well, at least in there. So you've taken on the brand operations side too, as well as CTO. That's not a combo that I think I've seen all that often. What does that actually mean? How did that come about?
And so we had a COO up until about August. Actually, I guess it's been just about a year ago. When the COO left, the executive leadership team was thinking about, do we need a COO? Do we need somebody to sort of handle the mechanics of what that role was? Our CEO brought in an executive vice president to run our field operations. So he's a road warrior. He's out in the field every day meeting with our leaders from, our restaurant leaders, our district operators, and sort of making sure that day to day they're frying the fish, they're greeting the guests, they're doing all of those things. That left a little bit of a void from a leadership level over our training department, over our brand operations, our franchise business consultants, our operation services teams. And so in February of this year, we sort of broke those things up a little bit. We handed training to our chief people officer. She's very well versed in training, and obviously training is a people development type thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So she's going to take that, combine it with other things, and get us moving in the right direction there. And then that left sort of the, what are the SOPs around the brand operations? What are our franchises asking for? What do they need? And so our CEO thought that's a great fit for the guy that's coming in and changing the world, if you will, for all of these folks on the technology side. And it has, I will say, as I look across my counterparts in the industry, I sit on a couple of different networking organizations. I've got CIO networking groups and I've got COO networking groups now. And all of them kind of, they scratch their head a little bit. The one thing that I think is an advantage for us because of this is that, and I'll use this expression, it might not be great, but it's an opportunity for the technology folks to eat their own dog food. And what I mean by that is that if we're injecting change into the restaurants, I'm getting an immediate feedback from the operators. I get immediate feedback from our operation support staff, from those folks that are responsible for food safety, from our franchise community. And so it's really tightened up my team on the technology side to work much closer with their operator counterparts. And so the ability to remove friction is accelerated by that. So while it does seem a little bit strange, I've always considered myself a very operations-driven technology guy. I've never been the technologist that wants to do technology for the sake of technology. Yeah, I can be a little bit of a propeller head at times, but by and large, I want to solve a problem.
Yeah.
And whether that problem is for the restaurant team members, whether that problem is for the guests, that's where I want to focus my technology energy. And now having brand operations allows me to see almost a 360-degree picture of whether we're actually achieving that, whether we've perhaps added friction. And so what's the next step to soften that down the line?
As you describe it, Tim, it makes perfect sense to me. It's not just deploying technology, throwing the technology over the fence to these restaurants and franchise owners. You're responsible for it landing and the procedures and the people using it, making it stick once it's landed. So you're both throwing it and catching it and making sure that the team is catching it and running with it, to really mix my metaphors there. But no, how you describe it makes absolute sense there. Let's talk about your background for a moment. And you mentioned a couple of different places where you've worked before, and that you've got some experience in this QSR, I think you call it, market. How do you describe your journey up until this point?
I describe my journey as a bit of a mutt. So I started out, first of all, I'm a United States Marine. I spent a couple of years right out of high school in the Marine Corps. And then out of that, when you get out of the service, generally speaking, depending upon what your job is, they'll ask you, they'll take a test. And I took a test and it said, you know what, you have a preponderance for doing things logical. So engineering, architecture, those are the types of things. I took a small, honestly, an adult education class in computer programming back in, oh gosh, all the way back in 1995. And so when I took that class, it just stuck with me. And so I literally got into technology, but I was kind of been all over the board, wherever the technology would take me. So I was a software engineer. So that meant programming everything from, at that point in time, startups. I spent the time in finance. I spent some time in healthcare, about 7-8 years there. Up until the time in 2011 when I took a role with Papa John's. Quite honestly, I was working a contracting opportunity, and Papa John said, hey, we'd like you to help us build out our Papa Rewards, our loyalty platform. They do all their own development. We'd like you to come on board and do that. And that's what started my stint, if you will, in QSR. I never really considered myself a food tech guy. But when you've been doing that for the better part of 15 years, it's something where it's kind of stuck with me now.
Right. Okay. So kind of a journey, landed at Papa John's, 15 years still in the industry. What's kept you there? What do you, I mean, obviously the jobs have kept you there, but is there something that's felt right for you for staying in that industry? Is it the fact that you are so close to customers with the technology that you deliver? Is it the fact that it is quite fast paced? Is it that you get a discount on the food from where you work? What do you put it down to?
I think it is the pace. I think it's the pace of the change. When I joined Papa John's, they were roughly, I think, 25% of their sales came through their digital channels. And if you can imagine growing that to 65% over the course of 9 years, I mean, there was just a tremendous push from the organization in that direction. Plus, as I got into the space, obviously we all eat food. And if it's something that you enjoy, understanding the folks that are not only creating the food for you, but also the folks behind the scenes that support those that do. I've got a saying, I brought it here at Long John Silver's, is that, we're not technologists. We're only here to support the people that make the food and serve our guests. So there's this thing when you're in the Marine Corps that every Marine is a basic rifleman, regardless of what they actually do for a job. And I believe that. I've carried that with me throughout my career. It doesn't matter what technology, because honestly, and I think if technologists sit back and listen to it, they'll go, well, that's right. It doesn't matter if I'm in healthcare or if I'm in finance or if I'm a startup or if I'm in food. Networks are networks, software is software. There is the application of that technology that is the nuance between the industry, but by and large, it's still the same thing. We all have different problems to solve, but we're going to use one of those tools in our tool bag to help us solve that problem. And so I think what's kept me around food service is just there's a constant influx of challenge. There's not very many industries that have a constant sort of rejuvenation of the working class. I mean, think about it. I started, one of my jobs early on in my life was working in a pizza restaurant when I was 16, 17 years old. And so I I worked with a lot of folks that were my age, some that were slightly older, some that were a little bit older, the GM, the franchisee. And if you look across the industry, there's just this constant revolving door of talent coming into your restaurants. And every new generation is used to doing things a little bit differently, or they come from a different concept. Hey, our make line at call it X brand, it worked like this. Or, my last business, I could schedule my own schedule. I didn't have to worry about the manager doing it. All of those bring innovative opportunities to a brand. And if I look back since 2011, there's not been many things that are necessarily solving the same problem. It's just been evolutionary. This year's problems that we solve will just, well, now I've created this less friction. Honestly, that just creates room for more friction to come from a different angle, and you've got to solve for that. So I think it's been the pace. I'm a very kind of fast-paced guy myself. I was an air traffic controller in the Marine Corps, very stressful job, lots of stuff going on.
Yeah.
And so I thrive in environments where throw the thing at me, let me help solve the problems, we'll figure it out and move it out of the way.
Well, then the thing that was thrown at you was this new vision for the brand with the new ownership in 2022. How have you been able to translate the conversations that you have with the senior stakeholders, with the CEO, with the owner, translate those high-level vision statements into things that actually translate into practical changes, deliverables on the ground? Because it's not just the retail, it's not just the technology, it's the people as well that you are kind of responsible for taking on a new journey, taking in a new direction now.
I think it's starting with, and this is going to be cliche, but starting with the end in mind, right? If the goal of the owner, if our goal of our CEO and our executive leadership team is to grow the brand, well, let's understand what growth means. Are we talking about unit economics? Are we talking about EBITDA? Are we talking about the number of restaurants? And then translating that into what are the hurdles? What, are we not profitable, and why? Where are there efficiencies to be gained in the restaurant that will allow our restaurants to become more profitable? If we're not able to build new locations, well, why? What's going on with the footprint, whether that be the machines, the parts and pieces, the municipality requirements? Are there things that technology can help lend us to, whether it's the front end planning for where do we do a new restaurant, or is it the actual technology that's going inside the box? And then finally, sort of translating that into, all right, well, how do we bring our guests in the door? To that point, we've kind of talked on some of those things. New point of sale makes it easier on the team member. New digital channels make it easier on the guest, the digital menu boards, the kiosk, the mobile app, introducing these things and then continuing to iterate on those. So it's sort of distilling down that vision. And, if you picture a pie, right? And unfortunately, we're going to look at the pie a little bit differently because they're only going to show one small slice. And that was, 2022 when Bob brought the brand. The goal is to fill up the pie. And each one of these additional initiatives, or each new restaurant that we build, each new franchisee that we add to the organization, each company-owned restaurant that we convert to a franchise restaurant, all of those help us continue to fill up that pie. And so it's just making sure that my folks are constantly keeping their eye on what the ultimate goal is, because it's super easy to get bogged down in the day-to-day challenges that are thrown at us. But just kind of keeping focus on, hey, solving this one problem helps solve the next problem and increases the pie.
Again, another food analogy there. I like them all. So you've gone from 4 figures down to 500 or so locations right now. As I understand it, some of those, you mentioned there, are company owned. Some of those are franchise owned. So you've got different types of communication or different relationships with different branches, different stores in different places. Talk to me about how you are managing the change, because change is friction, as we've just discussed there. The change with your team members in the franchise base. How do you make sure that all of those people are going on the journey with you, that it's not kind of thrust upon them, but they feel like they're all trying to fill out the same pie? You know what I mean?
Yeah. It boils down to communication. So even though we've got about 220 corporate owned locations, and the remainder of that 500 exists within our franchise community, but we like to treat our operations, our company-owned operations as just a really large franchisee. So
Right.
whatever we're going to do in terms of preparing that team for the change, we need to make sure it's super solid. The communication, how far in advance we communicate that the change is coming, and then try to show as much as we can about what that change is going to look like. Train those individuals on the change. And then the day of the change, hey, here's what's coming, here's what you can expect, here's what you're going to see. So that has been huge. And it's been one of the challenges because you think you're communicating to folks at a certain level, and then what you're realizing is it really getting filtered down, because that's the responsibility of the leader. So we've had to do some pivots and adjustments. We would normally routinely send out a newsletter. We've also leveraged our HRIS system, our system where everybody is connected to it because it's your payroll. We're leveraging that system to sync communications because we know it's getting past the manager, it's getting down to the individual team member, and we're starting to sync communication that way. Same thing on our franchise base. Wherever we've got systems where we've got the opportunity to put notifications or things to the frontline team member,
Yeah.
we're doing that. So I think it's, for me, it's always been I'm an open book. Certainly with the people that report to me, unless the CEO, unless the owner, unless the board and other roles has said this is highly confidential, can't share it, I'm going to share it. I want people to understand, hey, we're trying to go take that hill, and here's why. Here's the strategic imperative behind why we want to take that hill. Here's the path that we're going to do to take that hill. Let me know if you see any issues that you might encounter that we need to tackle on that way. But it's bringing folks along in that journey.
Yeah.
We recently introduced the concept of why Wednesdays. And the reason behind that is because we felt like team members in the field didn't understand some of the procedures that they were doing. They just, why do I have to do this? And so the concept behind why Wednesday is reminding folks of how this brand started and why we do certain things, because they influence the quality of our product, the quality of the food, the taste of the food. And we want our guests to get and understand why Long John Silver's is differentiated from our customers, and it's in the batter, it's in the flavor. And so this introduction of why Wednesday, every Wednesday we take a little something. It could have been something that last week we dealt with an issue, and it's like, gosh, people don't understand X. So let's send out a communication on that. Make sure we send it across email, make sure we send it across our HRIS system. I want everybody in the field to understand why we do that. They don't have to agree with it. That happens sometimes, but at least they understand the why. And I think that has just been hugely important in starting to change the culture here at Long John Silver's.
I love that. Absolutely love that. And obviously, there's a lot of not baggage, but there's lots of people who make a lot of money on the internet and at events about talking about why and finding your why and all that sort of stuff. But actually, to build that into your team communications, company conversations, and reinforcing the why you do what you do helps to get everybody on board and helps them to, I guess, go on a journey with you in terms of the transformation while keeping those core principles very much at the center. Let's talk about, I guess, with your CTO hat on there, some of the tech. And I guess one of the questions, particularly with the transformation that you're undergoing right now or driving right now, is the build or buy question, because I'm sure there are a lot of quick service restaurants across the world, across the US. I'm sure there are lots of providers who provide kind of white label type service for those. What's your approach then with your technology stack?
Here at Long John Silver's, it's kind of easy for me just because I simply don't have a large team that really has the capabilities to build. So our decisions are often like, what's the best thing to buy? But in a prior life, certainly, and as a software engineer, I certainly have the capability to do that and have had the capability to do that in the past. The biggest thing, and I remember a distinct conversation with a former CEO, at Papa John's at the time was, is the thing that we're building, example, point of sale system, is that a differentiator for our brand? Does that make a consumer go, I want to choose Papa John's over Domino's or something like that? And if we can't answer that question and say yes, then I would say, why are we building it when there are tons of companies out there who actually make that their key differentiator. Example, we use Genius point of sale system versus some of the other point of sale systems. That company is dedicated to making sure that they've got the best point of sale system out there because they're competing with other folks that build
Yeah.
point of sale systems. So they need to be investing in that product. It needs to be evolutionary. For us, our product is the fish, it's the chicken, it's the batter. Those are our differentiators. So while we certainly could look at buying things, and for Papa John's at the time, certainly digital was a differentiator. Everybody was used to picking up the phone to call the pizza company to get the food delivered, or to call a Chinese restaurant, for example. They don't often do that with drive-through QSRs, but that was a differentiator, making sure that you had a frictionless environment. Like, invest in your tech there, because that is your differentiator over Domino's. But for us, we really try to look at what are the key players in the space, who's offering the best back office solution for us, what's the best point of sale solution, labor management. And we've also taken this approach that we want an ecosystem that's highly connected. So the integration's got to exist across those things, because the last thing I want is one of my team members to have to log into 15 different systems. So we're trying to do what we can to limit that. We're also trying to do what we can to remove the manager from the back office, because the manager should ultimately be quarterbacking their team. They should be leading from the front, and they can't be doing that if they're in the back of house looking at reports or worrying about the next schedule. So we're trying to enable those things to be in their hand, in their pocket. And there's just a ton of companies out there that compete in that space as differentiators. So for us, it's pretty simple. It's a buy. But that's the one question that I've always held in the back of my mind. If it's not a differentiator for you as a brand in the primary service that you offer, why are you building it?
Again, from conversations with CTOs, you get all kinds of requests coming in. Are there times when you've got a tap on the door and an email in your inbox, or a question around a table about, we want this capability, we want this, we want this platform, we want this thing, and it's like, I get you, but that's not something that I think we can buy off of a shelf. How do you balance the specificity of the request versus being practical about deploying it when, like you say, you don't have a team of developers behind you?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, and actually just faced that recently with our CMO was looking for a budgeting tool, that she just, she looked across the industry. She did, everything was too big for what she was trying to accomplish. Essentially, she's trying to budget local store marketing and make sure she can answer to our franchisees. You know, they make a contribution to an ad fund. Hey, how does my contribution really help my restaurants? And interestingly enough, in today's age, right, we've got AI. And so she fired up Claude, and she quickly
Oh,
worked
wow.
through and built a system that would allow her to do that. And fortunately, she's a very collaborative partner. So she came and talked to me very early on and said, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. And I said, you know what, happy to put my architect hat on, happy to get with some of the folks on my team that, can make sure that, you're not getting into you're not painting yourself in a corner, so to speak.
Yeah.
And we'll kind of make sure, but feel free to play in that space. If there's not something out there that you can find, feel free to play in that space. We'll make sure it's something that once you're done, that we can support you with that tool. And so that has been a little bit of a game changer. It's my first time. I've always dealt with shadow IT in my career, and that's where a department, a team, somebody goes and gets a solution. They don't talk to the IT folks until something breaks, and they're like, "Hey, my entire business, my daily functions run off X software, and it's broken. I need your help." I didn't know anything about it. So, the introduction of AI and the ability
Yeah.
for tools like Claude to allow folks that don't have, engineering, programming degrees, really honestly, or even tech people, to build systems that they can then layer on business process on top of. It's a little dangerous. So you've got to be, I think, when you sit in my seat, you've got to be very collaborative. You've got to be able to say yes more than you say no. You can say yes and to introduce why, you might not want to go down a route. but I think you've got to be super collaborative. Those folks got to be willing to come to you and tell you when they want to do things. And I think it's our job. That's part of the puzzle of being a technologist is okay, that's all they're introducing to me is now a new problem. How do I support them with this tool that they've built, whatever? But it's it is always going to be a challenge to match the pace and the velocity of your team, whether that be building solutions, buying solutions. There's not a solution out there to the demands of the business. I oftentimes will try to lean on, hey, let's go out there and let's look and see if we can find something. Maybe we can hack something together with the folks on the team, or in this example, go do it yourself, and then we'll figure out how to support it.
Shadow AI, that's a conversation that having with a lot of CTOs, CISOs as well, and the security challenges that brings when you are connecting applications, scripts, whatever you want to call them, that have been lashed together by non-techie people to your core business systems. There's all kinds of questions and solutions potentially, like you say in the case of your CMO there, but that's not a quick fix, whatever it is. Thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for telling the story of where you are, where Long John Silver's is at. I do have some travel to the US over the next 6 months or so, and I will be looking up one of those 500 or so stores and seeing if I can find one in Dallas, San Francisco, Minneapolis. I forget where else I'm going, but I'm sure I'll be able to find one nearby.
You'll definitely be able to find one in Texas.
All right,
for sure.
I'll hit you up if I need a bit of directions there. Listen, before I let anybody go, though, Tim, we ask some quick fire questions to all of our guests, and this show is called CXO Secrets. So I have to ask you, what is your CXO leadership secret? If you put your modesty to one side, what behaviors, what habits or traits do you think have helped you to do what it is that you do today?
I would say it's discipline. When I was in the Marine Corps, discipline was drilled into my head, and that might sound like something. Well, okay, that's not very specific to him, but honestly, it is discipline in every aspect of my life. So I get up at the same time every morning. I do the same exact routine getting into the office. When I come into the office, it's the same thing. Check the to-do list, check through the emails. Let's look at the calendar for the day. Let's go greet our people and say hi, because that's obviously part of leadership as well. But it's just the discipline to keep the regimen. That's been something that's been super successful for me.
We do a Pass the Question on this show where we ask you to pose a question for a guest on a future episode of the show, whoever they may be. But first, though, we have a question from a previous guest, Reza Salari, who is CISO at Pacific Life Re. And his question goes like this.
This was a really tough one to think about, but one of the things I've always learned the most is from bad leaders. So my question would be, what is the greatest lesson you learned from the worst leader you've ever worked for, and how has that shaped your leadership style?
Well, fortunately, I've worked with some pretty good leaders in my past. However, the one thing I think, there's this premise of don't get into the weeds. Whenever you get into a leadership role, folks say don't get into the weeds. And I recently wrote a LinkedIn article on this, but I think the biggest lesson I learned is know when to get into the weeds, and never be too far away from the work. And what I mean by both of those is you certainly want to be able to delegate, and you don't want to dictate the means. You don't want to be a micromanager. Provide clear direction to your team, let them know what the target is, and then let them go do what they're paid to do. Be super smart people, right? But you've got to understand when your gut maybe says something doesn't feel right. The project feels like, that's the second time or the third time I've got a status report and everything's just green and there's really been no additional detail around it. Got to understand when you need to dig into the weeds and utilize your expertise. And don't get too far away from the work, meaning understand what you're asking your people to do. A lot of times, as I grew up in my career, and certainly I don't have the opportunity to configure systems or go out there and necessarily write code or do something that I ask my team to do. But at least I try to understand what it is. I know the job that I'm asking you to do. I know how hard or easy or whatever the case may be. And so I think if you keep that perspective, don't get too far away, but know when you've got to get in and insert yourself to do the blocking and tackling to free up your team or to get them past a hurdle. I think that's been the key lesson that I learned. I had a leader in the past that just he stayed up here. He never got down here. He wouldn't understand the challenges that were going on within the team and why the project wasn't moving along. He was one of those guys that just, get the project done. Why is it off the track? You try to explain to him, it's like he didn't understand it. So that was hugely frustrating and something that I've stuck with me. So I don't want to be that guy.
And what question do you have for a future guest on the show?
Yeah, I would say, what's the one skill that you carried with you throughout your career that has served as your silver bullet? It's the one thing you can always dip back into your toolbox and go, regardless of what's going on, I can level myself, I can center myself, and I can help solve a problem because I do X.
Great question. I look forward to asking that to a future guest. But for now, Tim Newton, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of CXO Secrets.
David, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope you and the viewers get something out of it.